The lie that destroyed my marriage did not begin with an affair. That was what made it so much harder to understand. If I had found lipstick on a collar, hidden messages, or hotel receipts, the story would have been simpler. Painful, but simple. Instead, I discovered something far more dangerous. It was a lie hidden inside our finances, our plans, and the future we thought we were building together. For 11 years, my husband and I worked toward the same dream. Or at least, that was what I believed. We were careful. We were practical. We made sacrifices most people never saw. By the time the truth came out, it was already too late to protect what we had spent a decade building. Stories like this often appear on Exposed Stories media, where a single hidden truth can unravel an entire life. But when the story belongs to you, it does not feel dramatic. It feels humiliating, because you start asking yourself how long you were living beside a stranger without knowing it. My name is Lauren, and for most of my adult life, I believed I had chosen the right man. My husband, Ethan, was not flashy. He did not charm rooms or chase attention. He was steady, intelligent, and thoughtful in a way that made other people trust him quickly. He worked in commercial architecture and took pride in doing things properly. That mattered to me. I did not grow up around stability. My parents loved each other, but money was always tight, and uncertainty was always close. By the time I met Ethan, I knew exactly what kind of life I wanted. Not luxury, not spectacle, just security. We met in the year 2011 at a mutual friend's dinner party. He was quiet at first, but when he spoke, he listened as carefully as he answered. He asked questions that made it clear he was paying attention. There was no performance in him. That was what drew me in. Within 2 years, we were married. Our early life together was not glamorous. We rented a small apartment with thin walls and a kitchen too narrow for 2 people to move in at once. I worked in healthcare administration. Ethan was still climbing professionally, taking on long hours and side projects that paid little but promised future opportunity. Every month required discipline. Still, those years made me believe in us even more. We planned everything together. We talked about buying a home, starting a family, and building a financial cushion large enough to survive emergencies without panic. We agreed on nearly everything important. Spend carefully. Save consistently. Think long-term. That became our identity. Our friends joked that we were the responsible couple. The ones who said no to expensive vacations and yes to retirement contributions. The ones who could explain compound interest at a birthday dinner without sounding bored. At the time, I wore that identity with pride. By the year 2017, our life had started to reflect the work we had put into it. We bought a modest but beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood. Not the biggest house on the block. Not the newest. But it was ours. I still remember the first night we slept there. The rooms were half empty. There were boxes everywhere and no curtains in the bedroom yet. But Ethan lay beside me in the dark and said, "We built this." At the time, those words felt sacred. Over the next several years, we kept building. We refinanced carefully when rates improved. We opened a college fund after our daughter, Sophie, was born. We put money aside each month for repairs, emergencies, and future goals. Nothing about our life happened by accident. That is why the lie felt like such a total collapse. It was not only a betrayal of love, it was a betrayal of structure, of everything we had measured, delayed, and protected together. That kind of betrayal changes the meaning of ordinary memory. The first sign that something was wrong appeared so quietly I almost missed it. It was a Thursday evening in late autumn. Ethan had come home later than usual, still wearing his work clothes, and said he needed to step back out after dinner to meet a contractor. That was not unheard of. His projects often involved last-minute site issues. But when his phone buzzed on the counter while he was upstairs changing, I saw a bank notification. Normally, I would never have looked twice. We had joint financial responsibilities, but we also respected privacy in the ordinary ways. Still, the wording of the alert caught my eye. It mentioned a transfer to an account I did not recognize. The amount was $5,000. Not enough to destroy us, but enough that I should have known about it. When Ethan came back downstairs, I asked about it casually. He did not flinch. He said it was a short-term transfer connected to a side investment opportunity with someone from work. He said the funds would be back in a few weeks with a small profit. That answer should have reassured me. Instead, it stayed in my mind longer than it should have. Not because it was obviously false, because it was too smooth. The kind of answer people prepare in advance. Still, I let it go. Marriages survive because people do not interrogate every unusual detail. Trust requires some level of ease. And after nearly a decade together, I had no reason to suspect something larger. A month later, another detail appeared. This time it was not a transfer. It was a credit card in Ethan's name I had never seen before. I found it by accident while looking for postage stamps in the office drawer. At first I assumed it was an old card he never used. But the expiration date was recent, and the statement attached to it had charges from hotel restaurants and high-end clothing stores. When I asked him about that, he laughed lightly and said it was a business card tied to reimbursable expenses. Again, the answer made sense on the surface. Again, something in me stayed restless afterward. I told myself I was becoming paranoid. Marriage changes after children. You become more tired, more practical, less instinctive. You start measuring concern against the cost of unnecessary conflict. So I chose calm over suspicion. But calm has limits when the details keep accumulating. Over the next 4 months, Ethan became harder to read. He worked later. He guarded his phone more carefully. He started taking solo drives on Sunday afternoons, saying he needed time to think through project issues before the week began. Nothing about him turned openly cruel. That would have been easier to confront. Instead, he remained gentle, present enough, still affectionate in small ways. But there was distance in him I could not cross. One evening, while reviewing our monthly budget, I noticed a savings transfer had not gone through. That mattered because we automated almost everything. Retirement contributions, emergency savings, the home repair account. We built consistency precisely so we would not have to renegotiate priorities every month. When something failed, there was always a reason. I asked Ethan about it after Sophie went to bed. He said cash flow had been tight for a few weeks because he was waiting on a delayed bonus and covering some short-term professional expenses. He promised it was temporary. He said he would move the money back as soon as the bonus landed. Then he kissed my forehead and asked if we could not turn a small hiccup into a stress event. That phrase bothered me more than the missed transfer. A small hiccup. That was how you describe a broken toaster. Not a pattern of unexplained money movement inside a household built on transparency. But once again, I let the conversation end. The real shift came in the year 2023. Sophie had just turned 6. I was thinking more seriously about reducing my hours at work for a while because her school needs had become more demanding, and Ethan had recently said his income was strong enough to create flexibility. We talked about that possibility more than once. He told me not to worry about money. He said he had things under control. He said we were in a better position than ever. That reassurance shaped my choices. So when I did reduce my hours in early spring, I did it with full confidence in the marriage and the numbers we had built together. That decision would later haunt me, because 3 weeks after my new schedule started, I opened the mail and found a notice from our mortgage lender. Not a routine statement. A delinquency notice. At first I thought it had to be a mistake. Our mortgage was on autopay. We had never missed a payment in our lives. For several seconds, I simply stood in the kitchen staring at the envelope. When Ethan came home, I showed it to him immediately. He glanced at it, frowned in a practiced way, and said there must have been a bank processing issue. He told me not to panic. He said he would call in the morning and get it sorted out. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I checked the joint account before Ethan was awake. The mortgage payment had not failed because of a processing issue. It had failed because there was not enough money in the account. That was the first moment I felt real fear. Not confusion, not irritation, fear. I waited until Ethan left for work. Then I sat at the dining room table and opened every account I had access to. Within an hour, the shape of our life had started to come apart. The emergency fund was nearly empty. The home repair account had been drained. Even the savings bucket labeled Sophie's education had been reduced by more than half. I kept checking and rechecking because the numbers did not seem possible. We had not been living extravagantly. We had not taken expensive trips. Nothing in our visible life explained where that money had gone. Then I found the transfers. Not one or two, dozens. Over 18 months, money had been moved from our savings into accounts I did not recognize. Sometimes in amounts small enough to hide among ordinary expenses. Sometimes in large sums that could not be explained away as anything routine. By lunchtime, my hands were shaking so badly I had to set my phone down twice. I called Ethan. He did not answer. I texted that we needed to talk immediately. He replied 20 minutes later with only one sentence. In a meeting. I'll call soon. He did not call for 3 hours. By then, I had done something I had never imagined doing in my own marriage. I had pulled his credit report using the household documentation we kept in the safe. What I found made my chest go cold. There were multiple loans I knew nothing about. Personal loans, business lines of credit, 2 credit cards near their limits. And most terrifying of all, a second mortgage application that had been initiated but not completed. That was the moment I knew the truth was worse than financial carelessness. My husband had not told one lie. He had built an entire shadow version of our life beside the real one, and I had been living inside the consequences without knowing it. When Ethan finally came home that night, he knew immediately that something had changed. Not because I shouted. I didn't. I was too far past ordinary anger for that. The documents on the table said enough. For a few seconds, he stood in the doorway looking at the bank printouts, the credit report, and the mortgage notice. Then he set his bag down slowly and asked where Sophie was. That question told me he understood the situation fully. He knew this was no longer a conversation he could manage with half-truths. I told him she was at my sister's house for the evening. He nodded once and sat down across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked exhausted, but not surprised. I asked the most obvious question first. Where did the money go? He rubbed one hand over his face and said something I had not expected. It started as a business opportunity. That sentence changed the entire landscape of the problem. Until then, part of me had assumed affair, secret addiction, gambling, some cliché of marital collapse that, while devastating, would at least fit inside familiar language. But this was different. He told me that about 2 years earlier, a former client approached him about investing in a boutique development project. It was not a scam on the surface. The plan involved converting older commercial properties into high-margin mixed-use spaces in neighborhoods beginning to gentrify. The projected returns were enormous. Ethan said he ignored it at first. That part I believe. He was not reckless by nature. That is what made what followed so much harder to understand. The lie did not begin with his personality. It began with his pride. The former client kept pressuring him. He said Ethan had the design knowledge to identify strong properties before the market fully recognized their value. He said this was the kind of opportunity people later regret missing. He said 1 or 2 successful deals could change a family's future completely. Ethan told me he started with a small amount, $5,000. The same transfer I had questioned months earlier. He said that first investment actually produced a fast return, which was what destroyed his judgment. That early success convinced him he had discovered something exceptional. He told himself he was not betraying our financial plan. He was accelerating it. That distinction became the moral loophole through which every later lie passed. He thought he was helping us, just secretly. When the second deal underperformed, he reinvested to protect the first gains. When that one stalled too, he moved money from savings to avoid admitting the loss. Every new step had the same internal logic. Just one more move until everything stabilized. Just one more lie until the truth became good enough to reveal. But the projects did not stabilize. Construction delays hit. Interest rates shifted. Partner disputes emerged. And Ethan, who thought he was playing a controlled financial strategy, found himself deeper inside a structure he no longer understood. That part might have been survivable if he had told me early. Painful, yes. Embarrassing, certainly. But survivable. Instead, he started borrowing. At first through cards. Then through personal loans. Then, incredibly, by using parts of our savings as temporary bridges he intended to replace before I noticed. That was where the lie stopped being ambition and became destruction. I asked him why he did not tell me when the first major loss happened. He stared at the table for so long I thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Because I couldn't bear watching you look at me like a man who failed our family." The sentence landed with a kind of tragic cowardice. It was not evil. That almost made it worse. He had not lied because he hated us. He lied because his image of himself mattered more to him than my right to reality. I asked about the second mortgage application. He admitted he was considering it as a way to keep one final project alive long enough to recover losses. He said if it worked, no one would ever know how close we came to disaster. That was the point where my control almost broke. Because there it was. The core of the whole story. He was willing to gamble our home to preserve the illusion that he had never lied. I stood up so abruptly the chair nearly fell backward. I asked him whether he understood what he had done. Not theoretically, not financially, humanly. I had reduced my work hours based on his reassurances. I had built decisions around trust in his words. I had believed our daughter's future savings were protected because he said they were. Every sacrifice we made, every year of planning, had been quietly undermined by choices I was never allowed to evaluate. He started crying then. Not loudly, not theatrically. In the subdued, ashamed way of someone whose internal structure has finally collapsed. But even that did not move me the way it might have before. There are moments in betrayal when compassion becomes dangerous because it arrives too early. What followed was not one long argument. It was a week of unraveling. The next morning, I called the bank, the mortgage lender, and a financial attorney my sister's husband knew through work. I changed online passwords. I froze access where I could. I moved the remaining money into an account Ethan could not touch without both signatures. He did not resist. That would have made him easier to hate. Instead, he cooperated mechanically as though submission could function as repentance. But repentance does not restore depleted accounts or reverse decisions made under false assumptions. The attorney was blunt. We were not ruined yet, but we were close. Some debts were negotiable. Some investments might eventually return fractions of what had been put in. But the immediate crisis was liquidity and exposure. If one more large payment failed, we could spiral quickly. That afternoon, I learned another truth. Ethan was not the only person in trouble. The former client who brought him into the deals had done the same thing to several others, though not always illegally enough to create easy criminal consequences. He thrived in the gray area between bad faith and aggressive risk. By then, however, it did not matter whether Ethan had been manipulated at first. He became responsible the moment he chose deception over disclosure. My parents found out 2 days later because I needed childcare and could not explain my face away with tiredness. Telling them was one of the most humiliating conversations of my life. Not because they judged me. They didn't. Because I had to say aloud that the marriage they admired for its steadiness had been built beside a lie for at least 2 years. My mother cried quietly. My father became furious, but in a controlled way that was somehow more frightening. He said one sentence about Ethan that I kept thinking about later. He said, "A man who hides risk is not protecting his family. He is using them as collateral." That was exactly right. In the weeks that followed, Ethan moved into the guest room. We did not announce a separation immediately because the financial situation was still unstable and Sophie needed consistency more than drama. But the marriage, in any honest sense, had already split open. Trust had not been damaged. It had been rendered structurally unreliable. He kept trying to explain, not the facts. By then the facts were all on paper. He tried to explain his thinking, as if the internal sequence might make me less devastated. He said he always intended to fix it before I ever felt the impact. But that was the lie beneath the lie. He did not just hide the truth. He hid from the truth himself by constantly postponing the moment he would have to face it. That is how some people destroy a life while still thinking of themselves as responsible. One night, after Sophie was asleep, I asked the question I had avoided. If the projects had succeeded, would you ever have told me? He answered too slowly. Eventually he said yes, but not immediately. Only once everything was safe again. That answer told me what I needed to know. He was not protecting me from stress. He was protecting his right to make unilateral decisions with shared money and shared consequences. The success case did not include honesty either, only triumph. That realization ended something in me more completely than any financial document had. Exposed stories media often tells stories where a hidden truth changes the emotional meaning of an entire relationship. This was one of those stories. Because once I understood that Ethan's ideal version of our marriage included my ignorance, every memory reorganized itself. All those years of teamwork, all those budget meetings, all those mutual decisions. I started wondering how much of the partnership had always been real, and how much had only felt equal because he was comfortable with equality while things were calm. The attorney eventually helped us create a plan. Sell one investment-linked asset at a loss. Negotiate with 2 lenders. Cut non-essential expenses brutally. Protect the home at all costs while we still could. The practical process was exhausting, but the emotional one was worse. Every form we signed was also an admission. Every repayment schedule was a receipt for a lie. Every conversation about restructuring forced us to speak like people managing a shared crisis long after the trust required for partnership had died. And Sophie, too young to understand, kept asking why Daddy looked sad all the time. There is no clean answer to that. The aftermath of Ethan's lie lasted much longer than the discovery. That is something people outside these stories do not always understand. The revelation is only the start. Then come the months when truth settles into bills, custody schedules, second jobs, and the kind of exhaustion that changes your face. For the first 3 months, survival became the goal. Not emotional healing, not clarity, just containment. I increased my hours again, which meant reshuffling childcare and giving up the fragile routine I had built with Sophie. We canceled every unnecessary expense. Vacation plans disappeared. So did the kitchen renovation we had postponed twice already and finally thought we could afford. One night, after balancing 3 different repayment plans, I stood in the laundry room and cried so hard I had to sit on the floor. Not because of one specific loss, because everything felt contaminated. The house, the goals, even the vocabulary of our future. Ethan tried hard in practical ways. He took on extra work. He sold his car and bought a cheaper one. He turned over every account statement without being asked. If effort alone could have rebuilt trust, maybe the story would have ended differently. But trust is not rebuilt by intensity. It is rebuilt by time lived under truth. And by then the cost of his deception had reached too far into the structure of my life for effort to feel like repair. It felt like cleanup. 6 months after the truth came out, I filed for divorce. That decision surprised some people. A few relatives thought the real problem was financial and therefore potentially fixable. They said marriages survive worse. They said he was ashamed, cooperative, and still in love with me. All of that may have been true, but money was never the deepest wound. The deepest wound was that he looked me in the eye, over and over, and used my trust to keep control of a reality I was living inside. He did not only hide losses. He deprived me of the right to make decisions about my own life while there was still time to change course. Once I understood that clearly, the marriage became impossible to imagine continuing. The divorce was not dramatic. That made it sadder. No screaming in court. No public humiliation. Just paperwork, mediated discussions, and the quiet dismantling of a shared life piece by piece. We agreed to sell a parcel connected indirectly to one of the projects. It covered part of the debt, but nowhere near all of it. We kept the house only because I refinanced under punishing terms and accepted a smaller, harder future than the one I thought I was living toward. Even that felt like a victory. Ethan moved into an apartment across town. He saw Sophie regularly. He kept his word about financial transparency from that point on, though by then his honesty no longer functioned as intimacy. It functioned as consequence. For a while, I hated that he remained decent in so many visible ways. He was attentive with our daughter. He showed up on time. He did not try to manipulate her loyalty against me. That kind of behavior complicates grief. If he had become cruel, I could have simplified him in my mind. Instead, I had to live with a harder truth. A person can be loving in some rooms of life and still destroy another by what they refuse to reveal. That lesson changed how I think about character. We like simple categories because they comfort us. Good husband, bad husband, honest man, deceptive man. But the people who do the most damage are often the ones who still believe in their own goodness while creating consequences other people are forced to absorb. Over time, the financial situation stabilized. Not beautifully, not quickly, but enough. The emergency fund came back inch by inch. The mortgage became current again. Sophie's education account was restarted, painfully small at first, but honest. I learned more about money in that year than I had in the decade before it. Not the abstract kind of financial literacy people perform online. The real kind. The kind that begins with understanding that clarity is more valuable than optimism and that no investment is worth the surrender of mutual transparency inside a marriage. That became the deepest reflection I carried from the wreckage. People often think wealth is built through opportunity alone, through boldness, timing, and confidence. But real wealth is also built through process, through truth, through structures that can survive scrutiny. What Ethan wanted was not just profit. He wanted the emotional experience of being the man who transformed our future. He wanted success dramatic enough to erase the ordinariness of patience. And in trying to seize that feeling, he destroyed the slower, steadier wealth we had actually built. That happens in more lives than people admit. Not always through hidden investments. Sometimes through ego. Sometimes through secrecy dressed up as leadership. Sometimes through the belief that love makes transparency optional if the intended outcome sounds generous enough. Exposed stories. Media tells stories like this because they reveal something uncomfortable about ambition and intimacy. A lie does not have to begin with malice to become devastating. It only has to persist long enough to take away someone else's right to reality. That is what Ethan's lie did. 2 years have passed since the day I opened that mortgage notice. Sophie is older now. She knows her father lives somewhere else, and she knows adults sometimes break things they cannot fully repair. One day, when she is old enough, I will tell her the story carefully, not to make her fear love, not to make her distrust men, but to teach her that partnership without truth is only shared appearance. As for Ethan, I do not hate him. That surprises people too. I did for a while. Then the hatred thinned into something more useful. Distance, understanding, boundaries. I can see the weakness that drove him now. His fear of failure, his attachment to being admired as dependable, his inability to bring me bad news while he still believed there might be a way to rescue his own self-image. I understand all of that. Understanding is not absolution. That distinction matters. If there is one lesson in this story, it is not simply that lies destroy marriages. It is that the most dangerous lies are the ones told in the name of future good. The ones that say, "I'll tell the truth once I fix it." The ones that treat shared lives as if one person is entitled to make secret decisions until the outcome is polished enough to present. Those lies do not protect love. They hollow it out from the inside. My husband's lie destroyed everything we built together. Not only the savings, not only the plans. It destroyed the assumption that our future belonged equally to both of us. And once that assumption dies, the rest of the structure rarely survives for long. Still, something good did come out of the wreckage. Not because pain is noble. It isn't. But because truth, once forced into daylight, made a different kind of life possible. A smaller life, in some ways. A harder one. But also a clearer one. Now, when I look at the accounts I manage, the home I fought to keep, and the child I am raising inside a reality that is no longer distorted by someone else's hidden choices, I feel something I once confused with comfort. It is not comfort. It is integrity. And that may be worth more than the version of success I thought I was married into. If this story stayed with you, it may be because you recognized something larger than one marriage inside it. That is why Exposed Stories Media exists. Not just to reveal shocking betrayals, but to show what secrecy costs, what ego disguises, and how easily people confuse control with protection. Sometimes the most destructive lies are not the loud ones. They are the ones woven quietly into practical life. If you ever find yourself explaining away patterns that make you uneasy, pay attention. Read the notice. Check the account. Ask the second question. Because sometimes the truth that destroys a life is not hidden in romance or scandal. Sometimes it is sitting quietly inside the future you thought you were building together, waiting for the day you finally open the wrong envelope.